Happy Tuesday, everyone. This is Dr. Kenya and Dr. Deanne. We are here today to talk about mental models and how important they are to the process of innovating, looking for opportunities to reduce costs by finding those friction points that you can address. So let's jump into the conversation. So, what is a mental model? I put a little bit of information out there about them. They essentially are the mental representation that we have in terms of our context of how we interact with different things within an environment or a context, and how we understand that we can either utilize them, interact with them, get value out of them. So, mental models are really critical to our understanding of how we go about using something effectively. So, I'm going to pause there because I feel like I'm rambling already. Dr. Deanne, did you have
Ramble on.
anything to add?
No, I think I guess you'll dive into kind of how we're approaching what a mental model is, what it's
Absolutely.
composed of. But there are a lot of things you can do. We'll talk about as we get there, but they you can do ahead of time really simple things that prevent some of the simple but significant mistakes that you
Hmm.
make just by breaking with that mental model for a user.
Hmm.
So that's almost a discovery activity, but it can,
Absolutely.
you can tweak things because mental models, I think an important point, and we'll probably get into it, is they evolve. They will evolve with
Hmm.
experiences. So it's not saying because we have this is how you even think of iPhones and
Hmm.
different big things that have kind of shifted our mental models of how we interact with the world. So they do evolve. You're not stuck with a specific mental model. There are ways of adding that innovation in and kind of maybe even impacting that mental model over time. So
So the
now I'm rambling. Uh oh, Kenya, I think you froze.
we can, oops, we froze up.
Yep.
The best way that we can influence the ability for a user or a customer to gain a more accurate mental model is to take transparent capability and
Mhm.
make it, or take opaque capability. So black boxed capabilities and make them more transparent. Now, there's a balance. You don't want to make them
Right.
so transparent that you overwhelm the user with all of this technical complexity. But what I mean by that is when we talk about AI and trustworthiness and ethical AI, knowing what's gone into that AI and what feeds the machine learning, the training data set that went into training the model, that is a way in which you can help inform someone's mental model and help them to refine it so that they better understand that data, that information, the utility, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
I like to look at it from the standpoint of we used to have the CPU that sat on the floor next to the desk, and you knew what your computer could do for you, but you didn't know what was going on inside of that box.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But if you, on the flip side, you look at something like a bicycle, you can see all of the parts and how they work together. When when you pedal, you see what's going on. That allows you, as the person utilizing either the computer or the bike, understand or not what's going on in the inside or
Right.
in the back end and making things work. So
Yep.
mental models are critical to, um, I guess, innovation and system development.
Yes, and to meeting user expectations and not frustrating the heck out of
Yes.
them. But because if you break with that mental model, it's going to be a pain. It's going to be a pain point for the user,
Well, that's
especially
where
for
you
the
get users.
learner.
Yeah, and that's where users either can't learn how to use the
Mhm,
system or they
mhm.
put it down and they're like,
Right,
you know what? Let me just move on, figure it out. I was doing it manually before. I'll continue to do it
right.
manually. So let's
Or
jump in.
worse, there's somebody else out there who has a
Who is doing
maximum
it right?
mental model. Right.
That's right. Who is doing it right?
Yeah.
So I think the first and most important aspect of developing or creating a mental model is starting with what workflow or goal do you want to observe and engage customers and users around, and what are you doing? Like, how are you documenting it? Okay.
Right.
And so I think it's always helpful to document things kind of in a serial fashion where possible. So it goes through those tasks and the serial nature of those tasks. And we'll get into why that's important. But the first thing you want to do is recruit and engage the right set of people.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not your mental model necessarily.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of us start is when we look at a lot of software applications specifically, what you see is a result of a development team putting together what their mental model is of the system. And the challenge is, as the developer of the system, your mental model is both the front end experience and the back end capability, or the way things are developed and architected.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how a user looks at things from a mental
Yeah.
model perspective. So that's really important to first keep in mind, that your mental model is not that of your user.
Right. Not necessarily. And another thing that I think can, even for UXers, get a little stressful or lead to confusion is that, no, I mean, it's very common that you have individual mental models. So, but if you've done due diligence and gotten the right set of users and conducted the right activities to start mapping out and understanding those mental models and all the differences, you're usually going to have some trending pieces to to those mental models, and that's what you focus on. So I do think that can be frustrating. I think we've all done user research,
Absolutely.
and you've got 10 different views of how things should be done, but there's usually some commonalities with a
Absolutely.
lot of things. So yeah.
That's very true. And I think that that lends well to the second part of the exercise, which is after you've recruited the right people, then what you
What
want
do
to
you
do
do?
is observe and discuss how they go about that task. So if we were to look at uploading content to social media,
Yeah.
what the tasks that, so you're looking at the tasks, the respective actions rather, that align to those tasks, and the objects that are necessary
Yes.
in performing those actions and completing that task. And so when you look at going through the flow of how do I walk through the task of uploading a piece of content, the actions involve locating the content, uploading it, editing it, posting it, just say for example. But when you think about the objects that are involved, you've got to have an account with that social media platform. You've got to have the content that you're going to upload, so that you have to have a sort of illustration of all of those things and how they relate.
Yeah.
And then you go from there into the design process. Really smooth kind of understanding of what that user is thinking from start to finish in completing that task.
Right. And you have to include all of those components when you are breaking down a mental model, meaning those tasks, actions, objects. If you kind of let one slip, you may miss a big chunk. I think you had the one of the movie theater,
Yes.
one with your students, and you need to buy tickets, and everyone, if you're focusing on that model the process of walking up to a kiosk and paying cash, and getting your ticket
Exactly.
and selecting your movie. That's one way. That's one model of how to do it. The other one is, hey, I'm on the run. I've got an app.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm using digital wallet. I'm not using cash. I'm not at, it's a totally different
Yes.
experience that you need to account for. So yeah.
That's right. And I think in conducting those interviews and observations, what you might learn is that some percentage of your user population is doing things manually. The other is doing it through a digital wallet in terms of the payment process. So now what you've got to do is consider in your solution, how do I give users one option and the other option as well, building that flexibility so that they can access both options.
Yes.
I think
Yep.
that's important.
And they've got that model, right? Because they have a million experiences where they
Yes.
can conduct task in that way. So that's kind of already established in their head. Part of their model is, and their expectation is, I can do that. So.
What do you do in instances where you go through the process of observing different people and you find that those themes around those tasks, actions, and objects are so different that you almost can't find a theme? What do you do in those instances?
Yeah, that is interesting. Well, first, I want to make sure I'm understanding there are no kind of segment differences, like different types of users have different expectations. But
Exactly.
there are times you do have such significant, let's go back, if, maybe they're older people who don't want to use an app to buy their tickets, So there may be times you actually do have to balance or account for, depending on the situation. But take a little deeper dive and go, is it significant enough with these different segments or expectations that we need to address both in some way if they don't kind of clash with each other? But in the end, you have to make some decision, right, based on that data.
That's right.
And I think, I know we didn't talk about, but there are a lot of ways to capture that. And I don't know that I've come across a project where truly I couldn't, there wasn't some sort of theme or trend within those mental models. Where I've seen it where that's not the case is when you are trying to introduce something really new. And that we could probably have an entire conversation about, well, how do you do that? Because you're about to guide that mental model. You're on the cutting edge. You're innovative. There is no model. Then what becomes important, and in the case what you just said, if you do have to pick a side, let's say you have to bring one experience and you have a disparate group of people, then that's where that learning curve, you're going to have to focus on what can we do through maybe tutorials, at least making the interface where it matches the mental model, in terms of the UI elements. So maybe that'll help. So anyhow, that's usually because there are complex projects where people don't have strong mental models of how it's going to work, or they're really different. So I think that's where you have to make the best call you can as a user experience or product management specialist, and then help that user in a way that makes it where you're shaping that model in a new way.
Yeah, and if you think about examples like the introduction of the iPhone, that interaction pattern was so different than anyone had seen before. But if you think about looking at it from the standpoint of the tasks that your customer or user is performing with the phone, those didn't necessarily change. It was the actions that they performed and how they went about performing them, and the objects that they manipulated, like the swipe to get from one object to the other. Those are the things that change. So the mental model still gives you the sort of understanding of the tasks that are involved, but those actions and objects are what change in that.
Yep. And they did try to mimic some of the real world physical object interactions, just like back to when Windows first came about. They tried to imitate today file systems. Well, that's based on, at that time, people had a mental model that when you had a document, you stuck it in a file in a cabinet.
Exactly.
So that's how they addressed it. How can we work with whatever model they do have? And the Apple's a perfect example of, they did a great job of, hey, we know this is really new. Give me your hand. And when you popped open that iPhone for the first time, it held your hand through the process. So it actually made it an engaging experience, even though I didn't really have a mental model for using this touchscreen phone and accomplishing all these tasks on it. So,
anyway. No, it makes a lot of sense. And when we think about bringing down costs, understanding those points of friction. So if you have some illustration of that mental model and you understand where your solution today is not one that allows the user to kind of go through things in the flow or the order that they expect, then you know that there'll be those points of friction will exist, and those become your opportunities
Yes.
to either prioritize redesigning those areas, like you said, documentation, support training to
Yep.
look out for how do we help the user get around this challenge. So that's where you're able to then look at those points in that mental model to say, this is where the disconnect takes place.
Might
And
happen.
this is different from a journey. Like I think about the user or customer journey. That is the actions that you can see, but a mental model is more of the mental representation of what they're doing, the actions they're taking, the decisions they have to make, which is different. I feel like the two
Yeah.
may complement each other, but they're different.
Right. And it may be some of the things from your mental model just under. Yeah,
Mhm.
I really see you. You're always trying to understand that mental model even after a product is out there. But I still see, understanding that mental model has got to be an initial step. So even
Mhm.
before maybe you get to a journey, it'll feed into that journey map.
Yeah,
But yeah, I definitely agree. Yep.
yeah, yeah. Um, where have you seen? Go ahead. What were you going to
Oh,
say?
no, no, go ahead.
Before you forget, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you. I know there may be people, and maybe we need to ask if anyone's on. Definitely give your name and where you're from. Look, I'm taking over, Kenya. That's
Take
usually your
over.
job.
Go right
So
ahead.
we'd love to hear from anyone who might be watching. But some methods, I know a lot of people are like, well, how in the heck do I represent a mental model? And
Mhm,
how do I capture the mental model? And that,
mhm,
I think that's an interesting question and a very valid question. You're
mhm,
talking about mental models. How do I depict that? How do I capture it so I can look at those trends? Do you
mhm,
so I've seen a lot of ways it's done, down from cognitive mapping, where you
mhm,
get a group of users back to point one, make sure you have the right target audience, that's the segments you're going for, and have them map out like, okay, this is what you want to accomplish, whatever task, whatever
mhm,
product concept you may have, and have them map out their
mhm,
model. How
mhm.
would you represent that journey? I think competitive analyses are really good for
Yeah,
uncovering mental models because there are
yeah.
a lot of things already out there, that have well established as mental models. So, and then of course the IDIs, the follow me home, where you're actually watching what they're doing. That gets you some of
Mhm,
the things they can't verbalize, maybe in
mhm,
terms of how they view the world and interacting with the
mhm.
world. So anything that you've seen kind of
No, I
success.
think I think you spelled it out pretty comprehensively in terms of the different ways you can capture that information. I definitely think that you can get scrappy and just literally draw out or map out task one, task two to task N, and then under each task the respective actions,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
having someone talk through those for you or to actually document them for themselves is acceptable, or walking through with them so that you can capture some of those details or probe in those areas where maybe they might historically miss, um, like in the exercise that I was sharing with you about the students choosing a movie and then going to the movies. um, there was a group, for example, that jumped right to, they already chose the movie and now they're going to the process of finding the movie and then
yeah.
watching it. And I thought, well, that whole mental model around like the process of finding a movie was omitted from the mental model. And I said, if we were using this to create some sort of application or innovation, you have omitted that entire process of choosing a movie, which means all that functionality in this new application, for example, is not even considered in the conversation.
Yep.
And that might be a missed opportunity. So the value of having a mental model is it allows you to see comprehensively from step one rather, all the way to completing or that goal. You get to see what's going on in terms of that person's thought process. And that allows you to then see where do we have an opportunity to innovate around what that person understands and is doing today.
Yeah, and I think that's where AI comes in nicely as well, because you know, sometimes when the user's mental model is like they go into that gray space themselves, like, you know, here's my model, but I don't know, once I get here, I'm not sure how it happens to get to this end goal, you know. And recently, speaking of the shift in mental models, recently we've been on projects where all of a sudden that has become part of an individual's mental model. This is a reason to stay up and keep abreast and be ahead of where their heuristics or whatever it may be, where these mental models may be evolving. So, you know, look at tools that build things. You want to make it as easy as it can be to build in these, let's say, workflow processes. And you can drag and drop and pull everything over. And that used to be like wonderful for people. You know, your UI, things are where I expect them. Drag and drop. There's all these things I can do, and that works great. Well, all of a sudden, there was this cosmic shift in the last year. I would say really in the last year, where all of a sudden people were like, you know what, here's my mental model. I use Canva and I can now tell it, you know, what document or what process or whatever it is I want. Or I can use, you know, part of the Microsoft suite and leverage that AI. So now part of their mental model is that, like, I want to just tell it, and it give me a start to whatever this process, whatever this documentation or chart may be. So
that's a really good point, because if you think about, take away AI, take away some of the technologies that we have access to today, and if you think about our current or existing mental model, the important opportunity for companies is to understand that mental model enough to know, how can I introduce my product into that person's understanding of where they leverage my product, so that they go out and seek it out where they don't have it today. And when you think about some of what your mental model is, you get stuck in doing things a certain way because that's the mental model you've had your whole life. And when a new technology or AI is introduced, you forget that there's that opportunity to use that, unless it now becomes a part of that new or morphed mental model. And so part of the goal for companies is to look at, how do I introduce my technology in a way that it reshapes or refines that person's mental model, so they know when to lean on my technology in order to get something done.
Yeah,
that's a really key one.
Yeah, I think that's been a fascinating area too. That's what made me mention it. But that, like, you know, you were a rock star a year ago. You know, you had the best UI, you had the best experience. But again, if you're not really honed in on those mental models, all of a sudden you're old school within, you know, within a year. And I've seen that firsthand, where you were the rock star and you didn't kind of either keep up with the technology or didn't think it was priority enough. But in the meantime, people's models were shifting. And now, you know, you're not so great.
And going back to the competitor.
That competitor might be paying attention to that and might be looking for those areas of innovation.
So what are some gotchas you think companies can avoid, and how can mental models help them do that?
Well, I mean, to me, if you understand your user segment's mental model, it's going to
Mhm.
prevent, well, it certainly will prevent some big gotchas and a lot of little gotchas because
Mhm.
you have a representation of expectations. Does that mean you can't break? Maybe you're getting really innovative and you're
Mhm.
going to break that expectation. No, you can break that expectation if it's, you think it's going to be for the right reason, aka AI, when people first started
Mhm.
introducing it to everyday products. But I mean, to me, it just gives me a picture of the areas of focus
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
maybe some of those hard no's where I'm going to cause frustration for the user or I'm going to
Right.
cause a learning curve. Um, and then I'm either ready to design that out or work with the
Right.
team to design it out,
Mhm.
adjust that design, or I'm ready to hold the hand of the user. If it's really something that could potentially be powerful, lead to efficiencies, productivity, then it might be worth, hey, let me hold your hand right here. And maybe you don't even need to do that going back to, regular heuristics, just, get it in there in a way that makes it seamless. But I mean, to me, you just uncover a lot of areas first that you may have totally forgotten or not been
Mhm.
aware of. So that's a
Mhm.
big gotcha movie example. I know that's a basic example, but we've seen it
Mhm.
in big products. I like to give examples. So back to, the membership. Uh, you subscribe to this
Right.
service and there's a membership card. And what happened here, everyone had the mental model of expectations and how that card would be used and how
Mhm.
they sign up for it. Of the user, what they didn't have any mental model of, or very basic, they knew
Mhm.
the provider would take the card, look at the name on the card, and provide whatever service there was to
Mhm.
provide. What they didn't look at, if they had looked at the mental model and even of existing data mental model, by the way, you can go find mental models without having users. If they had really looked, well, their mental model is I'm going to have a name, I'm going to have a number, a membership number, I'm going to have an expiration date, I'm going to have people who are on members with them, have whatever it may be. Just there was certain basic information that they always check on those cards. So
Right.
no one had accounted for that, and it was a pretty huge major fail because it got
Right.
rejected. You had mad members. You had providers who were just like, I don't know what you're doing because you didn't look at the basic mental model. And that could have been done by making sure, go back to your point
Yeah,
one,
simple.
get the right user segment, get all the people who are involved in that workflow and understand each one's mental model. So if they had done that, there really would not have been an issue. And that was really just understanding that mental model of
Mhm.
expectations of that
A-
provider.
As you tell that story, it makes me think about the transition, the death of Blockbuster and the
Yeah.
birth of Netflix, and how understanding the user's mental model of securing or getting a movie or renting a movie.
Hmm.
That concept of movie rental, and what it was in the Blockbuster days is the same concept that we have today, but Netflix was able to reimagine the fact that,
Yes.
okay, if people understand they're going to search or look for a movie by genre or by release date, and then they can do all that online, they're still renting it,
Yep.
but instead of physically having to take it out of the house, they are just putting it back on the digital shelf. So all of those things were, um, I guess, foreshadowed by Netflix, and Blockbuster didn't get it because I
Right.
understand that they pitched the idea to Blockbuster and they were like, of course we wouldn't do that. So it goes to show that having that mental model, um, captured and well understood within your business, allows you to then step back and say, how are we doing things today, and how can we do them differently to be more effective in delivering value to our customer?
Right. We
And
have to evolve with that mental model.
yeah, and how can we look at the shift in not their task or their goal, I should say, but how they go about accomplishing that goal.
Yep. Yes.
And that order of things is still there. It's just executed differently.
Yes.
So that's an interesting one.
Yep.
That's an interesting one. So I think we've kind of covered the whole topic. Anything else you want to add before we kind of wrap it up and bring things home?
No, I always emphasize, look at that. That's the first thing you can look at, even if it's in a lean way.
Mhm.
Get a few people, look at some competitors, heck, do a heuristic. I always say do the heuristic, but a lot of those are even based on, those represent a lot of mental models.
What's a heuristic
Uh-huh.
for our audience?
Watch last week's. Yeah, so that's really getting an expert coming in. I think,
Mhm.
we talked last week about sometimes an outsider, someone
Mhm.
external to your org is good because it's a fresh set of eyes. They're focused on those
Mhm.
kind of, rules of design or process,
Mhm.
whatever it may be. And
Mhm.
you just take a few hours, take a day or two, and just have a couple of UX experts do an evaluation. So it's a quick and dirty way of doing it. And sometimes those really reflect some aspects of a mental model. But other than that, if you're already doing that discovery work, you're actually starting to gain a picture of these mental models. So if you think
Mhm.
about those
True.
conceptual IDIs, in-depth interviews that you do, or when you're doing ethnographic type of work, whether it's formal ethnographic or just kind of observing users, you're
Mhm.
starting to put the pieces together of,
It's
okay,
true.
here's what their mental models here, maybe segments what their mental models and what differences
Mhm.
there are there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then you kind of bring it together by looking for those opportunities to innovate.
Yeah.
And in innovation, you are looking for the ways in which you can change behaviors in a
Yeah.
positive way. So how can you move your user along with technology and innovation? How do you move your user along to get to a place where things are more efficient, more effective, that sort of thing?
Yep.
So I love it.
Yeah.
Um, Anything else you want to say before we wrap?
No, I think we're good.
All
I've had
right. Well,
fun.
yes. Well, thank you for watching. Any questions that you might have for either Dr. Deanne or myself, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our names looks like disappeared, but I'm Dr. Kenya.
Now I'm Dr. Deanne.
I was trying to give you the cue.
Oh,
Anyway, have a great day, and we will talk to you
yes.
next week.
All right. Bye.